On December 6th in 1970, a freight train derailed in Leroy, New York. This derailment caused a chemical spill, letting around 30,000 gallons of trichloroethylene seep into the ground. Around 40 years later, parents marked this as the cause of their teenagers' strange symptoms. But what actually happened with this derailment? Let's find out. Like I said, this happened on December 6th in 1970. It was around 3:30 a.m. that 25 cars of a 114-car Lehigh Valley Railroad freight train derailed in Leroy, New York. A railroad spokesman said that the derailment was caused by an overheated journal box that was in the 70th car on the train. A journal box is the metal housing which encloses the journal of a car axle. I'm not really sure what even it is, but I googled it for this video and I still don't understand. But it holds the lubricating device and oil for lubricating the journal, and it has an open lid and it's filled with shredded cloth and oil. Now, my information for this derailment, I'm getting my info from two newspapers that were reporting on this disaster at the time. Both of these were from the next day, so both of these were from December 7th, and one is the Democrat and Chronicle and the other one is the Buffalo News. I do want to mention that it's kind of a strange thing, but both of these papers had the train going and coming from two different places, and I'm not really sure why this is, but one of them said that it departed Niagara Falls in New York, the other one said Niagara Falls in Ontario, and then one of them said it was headed to Sire, Pennsylvania, and the other one said Manchester, Pennsylvania. And I looked into this because I was kind of confused as to why they were saying two different places, and I think the paper might have been referring to Ontario County in New York, which is around Niagara Falls area, but it's not where Niagara Falls is, because Niagara Falls is in Niagara County, so I'm not really sure why they typed it like that. And then also, it was probably just a misprint, or I don't know if it's maybe what they referred to that area at the time. Anyway, also with the destinations, so I looked at a map of the Lehigh Valley Railroad, and from what I understood and what I found, it doesn't look like the railroad goes to Manchester, Pennsylvania. So unless they're referring to a different Manchester and they just typoed the Pennsylvania, I believe that maybe it is going to the Sire, Pennsylvania, because Manchester is around 3.5 hours from Sayre, or Sayre, I believe, and no, it has to be Sayre. I need to Google that. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, and don't come for me in the comments. I don't care necessarily, but they might have been referring to Manchester, New York, which is where the Lehigh Valley Railroad roundhouse was, which the roundhouse is currently abandoned, but according to a PDF that I found, they are researching options for redevelopment as of June of 2022, so I don't know if they're actually doing anything with it. Anyway, back to the newspapers. So the police officers that were on the scene said that the car was dragged on the train tracks for about a quarter of a mile before hitting a switch and crashing off of the tracks. The derailment ended up disrupting the railroad communications and the Rochester Telephone Company lines. The first 69 cars that stayed on the tracks, they continued to their destination as noted by the sheriff, which was either Sayre, Pennsylvania, Manchester, Pennsylvania, or Manchester, New York. I don't know which one it actually is. The final 20 cars were backed away from the scene to make room for the arrival of a railroad work crew that was supposed to arrive just before noon, but that crew was actually preceded by workers and equipment of a contract cleanup and salvage crew from around the Buffalo, New York area. Now, I'm going to get into the actual chemicals and the stuff that spilled out in the train. The train was carrying various types of chemicals that ended up spilling out onto the grounds. The one of them was crystalline, I believe, the crystalline, I think is how you say that, form of cyanide. Next time I film, I'm gonna freaking research how to pronounce this stuff before I film, because I'm getting annoyed at myself because I don't know how to read. I'm that I'm like 90% sure I'm dyslexic. It is noted that this was one tank and it just partially spilled in the Superfund Record of Decision PDF that I used to get a bunch of research for this. And also it was approximately 2,000 pounds of the cyanide crystals. The the salvage crew that I mentioned earlier, they were called in to defuse the cyanide because they feared that it would generate deadly fumes whenever it came in contact with moisture, and the train itself had crashed into the snow. There was snow around the crash scene. They were barreling the cyanide and planned to return it to Niagara Falls to be neutralized, like back where it came from. After the crystals were removed, they spread neutralizers on the ground to counteract any effects that the remaining cyanide would have, or so they said. And apparently the Lehigh Valley Railroad attempted to eliminate the smell of the trichloroethylene in the spill area by pumping approximately 1 million gallons of water from a nearby flooded quarry and saturating the cleanup zone with it, and then they allowed that water to just seep into the ground. That is not a confirmed rumor. I don't know where that came from. It was listed in my notes, but I didn't for some reason put my source there when I started writing out this, so I don't know if that actually happened, but I think that is how they tried to clean it up. But the amount of water and where they got it from, I don't know 100% if that's true. There were other cars that were involved in the actual derailed part of the train. These contained other things like beer, plywood, and army jeeps, and there were a few other things as well. But the main event was the 2 tank cars that were filled with trichloroethylene. Now I would like to mention that for what I lacked in pronouncing any other word in this video, I made up for by listening to the pronunciation of trichloroethylene like 50,000 times
trichloroethylene
while I was writing this, because every time I go back and reread it over, I would just try to listen to the word again, so I really hope I'm saying that right. But around 30 to 35,000 gallons of trichloroethylene were spilled out onto the grounds surrounding the area where the train was derailed. And I want to mention that both newspaper articles that I found as a reference for this, they refer to the chemical as carbon tetrachloride. I'm not really sure why, but in the official report for this that I referenced earlier, it's called the Superfund Record of Decision for the Lehigh Valley Railroad derailment site, long name, that was submitted in 1999. It uses the term trichloroethylene, or TCE. Now, this report was published on July 27th in 1999 on the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's website. You can't access it on their website anymore. I'm not really sure why. You can only access it through Internet Archive, which is how I was able to read through it. But this PDF is 78 pages, and most of my information going forward in this video is going to be info that was pulled from that PDF. I will be linking the PDF in the description because it's really interesting if you want to read more about this. There's a bunch of other things that are just less important that I didn't mention in this video, but I'm going to summarize most of all the important stuff in this video. So if you want to check out just kind of the rest of it, you can go read that PDF. The spill had occurred east of the village of Leroy. Along a road named Gulf Road was where the train had derailed, and Mud Creek, which was located around 600 feet to the east of this spill site, it was a dry creek that often carried a lot of overflow water. Like if there was heavy storms or like a flooding event, it would carry that water. And the derailment site had formed a narrow gorge that extended around 1 mile to the northeast of the spill site to Oka Creek, I think is how you pronounce that, which that was a New York State designated trout stream. So this stuff was getting into like the actual like fish waters and stuff. The surface area of the spill site was approximately 1.5 acres, with soil that was contaminated with the trichloroethylene, and under the surface, the spill site covered around 10 acres with what they tested as pure undissolved TCE in the actual bedrock. In 1971, residents of the town, they were complaining of the smells of the chemicals like in their home, and there were reports of contamination of the nearby drinking water wells in the area. So the Lehigh Valley Railroad, they conducted like a cleanup activity at the spill site. They installed carbon filters to remove the trichloroethylene in several of the private drinking wells, and they also built ditches which they flooded with water to try to flush the chemicals out of the ground. At this time, this was the only form of cleanup that they had done to this site. It wasn't until early 1990, around 20 years later, that further tests were taken and the full extent of the contamination was discovered. The Lehigh Valley Railroad actually ceased operation in 1976, and following that they ended up removing the train tracks in the locations. Like the site wasn't actively being used or anything. In 1990 and 1991, while responding to a different inactive hazardous waste disposal site, the New York State Department of Health sampled more private water supplies that were east of the spill site and found that more than 35 private wells were contaminated with trichloroethylene. Once that they had discovered this, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, they installed more of the carbon filtration units in all of the wells that met the requirements, which the requirements were just that the water was contaminated with trichloroethylene above the standard of 5.0 parts per billion. The filters removed the chemical from the water so that it could be safely just used as drinking water, and in just everyday life, it was just safe water. Also in 1991, the site was listed on the New York State Registry of Inactive Hazardous Waste Disposal Sites. It was listed as a Class 2 site, showing that it poses a significant threat to the environment and to public health, and that actions were required to fix it. Tests were performed to characterize the nature of the contamination and like to the extent of it and everything, and an operation and maintenance program was initiated to protect the public health by maintaining the filters that they installed. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, they funded these tests with the state's Superfund, which was the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's program that is like responsible for cleaning up after contaminated things like this, like chemical spills and oil spills and environmental emergency type things. These tests that were done, they were a remedial investigation, which I believe is how you say that, and a feasibility study. They were started in 1992 and 1993 and were completed sometime before the paper that is referencing all this stuff was published in 1999. In this paper, there's a map of the well locations in reference to where the spill site is, and I can't really read this map that good, but one part of it looks like it says the word cheese, and I'm kind of down for that. So anyway, the report following the tests is the real interesting part, because it says, and I'm going to quote this from the PDF, many groundwater, surface water, soil, and sediment samples were collected at the site to characterize the nature and extent of contamination. Of the two chemicals spilled at the time of the derailment, TCE and cyanide, only TCE has migrated extensively away from the site. Cyanide has been detected at low levels in soil samples near the spill and has also been detected in groundwater from monitoring wells immediately adjacent to the spill. However, only one monitoring well close to the spill site exceeds the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation standard for cyanide, and no other wells exceeded that level of contamination. Consequently, cyanide contamination of groundwater is not considered a significant environmental concern at the site. So after 20 years of this chemical spill happening, they discovered that the cyanide that was supposedly cleaned up, like all the newspapers were talking about how they cleaned it up and it was probably all good, but they should just, keep an eye on it. Like, it was still there. They didn't clean it all up. It actually had gotten into the water, which is kind of scary. Like, not only was there one really bad chemical in the water, the trichloroethylene, but there was two that was cyanide as well. When I started researching for this topic in my previous video, I was really curious about the cyanide, but most of the things I read just kind of blew it off as not a big deal because of the other chemical. But it was kind of interesting to see in this PDF that they talked about it actually still being there. And in a different article that I found, it said that they lost track of the site and only found it again because of the testing for the other environmental thing. But I don't know where they got that info. Like, I don't know what source they used for that info. So I'm not going to say that that actually happened because I don't know if it did. It might be true and it might not be true. I don't know. And also, I'm gonna just cut in here real quick because I was planning on mentioning this earlier in the video, but trichloroethylene is dangerous because it is reported to cause multiple types of cancer in the kidneys, liver, and lymphatic system, among like other types of cancer. And I don't believe at the time when this spill happened it was known to cause cancer at all. It was just known to be kind of toxic, I guess, but it used to be an ingredient in various things like printing ink, industrial paint, rubber adhesives, lacquers, and paint strippers. And when I was looking this up, I found out that they also used it as an anesthetic in the 1940s through the 1980s, which is just crazy. Like, this stuff is like cancer causing, and they were just putting it on people's faces to put them to sleep. I believe a ban of trichloroethylene was actually proposed in December of 2024, and it will stop all manufacturing and distribution of it after March 17th of this year. I can't find a lot of info on this, and I'm not sure if the ban passed or if it was just proposed, but it's after March 17th, and I can't find anything else about it, so I'm not really sure. But going back to the article or the PDF paper thing, it talks about how the trichloroethylene interacts with water, saying, quote, although TCE is not highly soluble in water, it is sufficiently soluble to cause serious environmental contamination problems. This is because a very small amount of TCE dissolved in water makes the water unsuitable for human use. The physical properties of this contaminated water are nearly identical to ordinary water, so the contamination will be carried along with ordinary groundwater flow. The contamination will not be readily apparent to the human senses unless the water is very heavily contaminated. So basically, it's like not detectable in human drinking water from like regular water, so you wouldn't notice it if it was, I guess, in your water. This paper also shows the soil sample results and the results from the water test, as well as other tests and things that they did in the area to test the contamination levels. After they got these results back, they went into planning on what to do with the soil and the ground area. They ended up stating that removing the contamination to the low end of the range would not be level with the environmental benefits that it would achieve. So the cost to remove, I guess, all of the soil in the area outweighed the impact that it would have, and that it most likely the residual contamination would still be left in the bedrock, and that would cover or like counteract any benefits that the extra work and money would provide. They ended up setting a cleanup goal of 7.0 ppm or 7 parts per million, and this is also assuming that the soil was contaminated all the way to the top of the rock. I'm assuming they meant bedrock. They use the term top of the rock or top of rock, but I'm assuming they meant top of the bedrock. The volume of the soil was estimated to be 10,000 cubic yards, or around 7,600-ish cubic meters if you go by cubic meters. I read through the paper and it shares a lot of alternative cleanup plans, so I'm not sure which if they ever actually went through with this in 1990 or which one they ended up trying to do. There's a long section at the end of the paper also with questions and letters that were submitted by locals in the town and people that had questions about the environmental concerns and kind of like symptoms and stuff. And if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I would highly suggest that you go read the letters because they're very interesting. And it's kind of people complaining about maybe someone in their family gotten sick or something, and they submitted that to the government to answer their question. Like I said, I will be linking that in the description if you would like to go read those. Now, after, I mentioned earlier that the railroad did close down, but after the disaster happened, the railroad closed in 1976, and the railroad itself was sold to different companies over the following years, but it is now owned by Norfolk Southern Railway, and the old route pretty much is still active, minus obviously the part of the track that was removed because of the chemical spill, and then also the route directly to New York City that has been removed. An article in 2015 from the Democrat and Chronicle again, they talked about them finally clearing up the soil, so I'm guessing that maybe not much was done in the 90s. The article says, and I'm going to quote this, "When everything is in place this summer, a contractor will begin pulling gaseous TCE from the soil with vacuum pumps at a heavily contaminated 3/4 acre spot where the derailment occurred. With a maximum 2-year period, they're hoping they'll be able to remove all the TCE via this operation from the soil." And then on the Environmental Protection Agency's website regarding the spill site, it says that, quote, "The evaluation of the analytical data collected during and following the SVE system operation indicated that the system was not successful in remedying I'll put the word here, blank the soil in the spill area down to the cleanup goals. So they tried, but it still is currently just being monitored as it was before, I guess. So like they cleaned up some of it, but it didn't work as well as they thought it would. So as of now, the chemicals are still there, and it's just actively being monitored as a chemical hazardous spill site. So not much, I don't believe, is actively being done about this, and it's kind of scary that this stuff is technically still in people's water. Like, I know it's being filtered, but like it's still technically in the drinking water. In the intro, I mentioned that the spill was referenced during a mass hysteria case in the same location surrounding some teenagers that were going to Leroy High School. And if you want to hear more about that, in my previous video, I did the video on the topic of mass hysteria, and I talked about that specific school incident, so go check that out next. I will link it somewhere on the screen. I hope that you learned something today about this. I think this is such an interesting topic because it kind of just goes to show that I don't know how many chemical sites, like you don't know how many chemical sites there are, and it's kind of scary that this is even like exists and they didn't clean it all up. And that town, like, let's be real, there's no way that that's not like affecting the people in that town in some way, probably, but or at least had affected the people during the time when they like lost the site or supposedly lost the site. Like, I wonder how many people during that time were affected by this. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and if there's any topics that you want to see for future videos, please let me know down below. I have a bunch of videos planned and a bunch of topics already scheduled down, but if there's something that you would like to see, please let me know. I would definitely add it on my list of videos. I love doing research for videos like this. It's just so interesting to learn about these types of things, and I hope that you enjoyed this, and I'll see you here next time. Bye!